The word hit the table like a slap I hadn't earned. "We don't take charity from leeches." She said it with a smile, her manicured hand resting lightly on mine, her friends sipping mimosas like they'd been waiting for this performance. The server froze, mid-pour. My son stared at his eggs as if the pattern on the plate could swallow him whole. I didn't blink, didn't defend myself. 69 years had taught me that silence can be sharper than any insult. I left my untouched coffee on the table, walked to my car, and opened the glove box. The family trust paperwork was still there, exactly where I'd kept it for a day like this. They called me a leech in public. I was about to make them bleed in court. Before we start the story, tell me where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to subscribe. The noon light poured through the tall windows of the East Bay brunch spot, catching on cut crystal and polished silver. Charleston did hospitality like a ritual. Shrimp and grits plated like paintings, waiters gliding in navy aprons, the gentle murmur of old money being careful not to look new. Amber thrived here. This was her stage. "Over here," she trilled, lifting a hand so her bracelets chimed. Her friends, pastel dresses, practiced laughter, scooted to make room. Adam hovered behind her, a tall question mark in a button-down. Catherine Holloway, cat to anyone who'd earned the right, stepped into the circle of chairs with a nod and a small smile. She'd chosen her armor carefully. Linen suit, the color of cream, pearl studs, the soft scent of gardenia that had once driven her late husband to distraction. She sat at the far edge of the table where she could see everything. Amber brushed a napkin into Kat's lap as if bestowing a favor. "We just love that you could join," she said. "You know how busy things get with the business lately." The way she said business made it sound like a handbag. Menus lifted. Orders were a choreography. The avocado toast with an egg. 2 mimosas. Side of bacon, extra crispy. Kat asked for coffee. Black. The server, a young man with freckles across his nose, smiled, pen poised, eyes flicking between faces like he could feel the heat coming off this table. Amber narrated the morning for her friends, the fundraiser she was spearheading, the boutique collab, a rumor about a neighbor's new boat, a sprinkle of charity, a dash of superiority. When the food came, plates landing with the soft clink of china on wood, conversation rose to a warm, brittle hum. When the check arrived, tucked discreetly in its leather folder, Kat reached for it with an easy, practiced motion. She didn't do theater. She did math. Amber's hand landed on Kat's, soft palm pressing. A smile, glossy and wide. "Oh, we don't take charity from leeches." Silence at first, then the kind of laughter that sharpens at the edges. Her friends smirked without quite meeting Kat's eyes. One offered a sympathetic shrug, the kind that says I didn't say it while staying to hear the echo. The server froze, color draining a shade, pen slipping from his fingers and tapping twice against the notepad. Adam stared down at his plate, as if grits could provide shelter. His jaw clenched, his mouth stayed shut. Kat removed her hand from beneath Amber's gently, like extracting a thread from a sleeve. She didn't blink. "Of course," she said, and took a sip of coffee. It was strong, dark, honest. Everything the moment wasn't. Conversation stuttered, then resumed in a rush. Amber laughed brightly at her own line again, repackaging cruelty as wit. The server slid the folder back near Amber with a quiet, "Whenever you're ready," and avoided looking at Kat. Kat placed her napkin on the table with care, corners aligned. "You'll excuse me," she said, her voice smooth enough to pour. "I have an afternoon appointment." She stood. Amber's friends plastered on polite smiles. Adam didn't look up. In the foyer, Kat paused long enough to feel the cool air from the door draft against her wrists. The host murmured, "Have a lovely day, ma'am." The word ma'am here was respect, not expiration. Kat met his eyes and nodded once. On her way out, the server caught her gaze, eyes flicking to Amber and back. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Outside, the humidity wrapped around her like a warm towel. Live oaks cast lacework shadows over the sidewalk. The harbor light flashed in the distance. Kat's hand was steady on the car door. She slid into the driver's seat, shut the world out with a soft thud, and sat in the quiet for one deep breath. Then she opened the glove box. The papers were exactly where she left them. The family trust summary, the controlling interest schedule, the clause footnotes on crisp vellum she refused to convert to PDFs because her fingers trusted weight. Holloway Holdings, ownership allocation. Her name next to 51%, printed in ink that did not care about brunch. She turned a page to the addenda. Clause 7.1 glinted up at her like a small, sharp tooth. In the event of financial misrepresentation or misuse under the Holloway name, a petition for emergency reassessment may be filed by the controlling owner without prior notice to the managing partner, SAS. Her late husband had insisted they leave it in back when family still meant alignment. She had insisted on the without notice. A breeze slipped through the cracked window, carrying salt and the faint fry smell of someone's late lunch. Kat traced the clause with one fingertip, as if signing with skin. Her phone vibrated against the console. A message from Adam. "You okay?" She considered it, then let the screen dim. Concern without spine was just another kind of absence. She closed the glove box softly. In the rearview mirror, she could still see herself. Hair neat, pearls steady, eyes the color of rain when it means business. Her pulse was calm. Her mouth, finally, made the smallest shape of a smile. Not pleasure. Readiness. Kat put the car in drive and eased into traffic. Spanish moss whispering overhead like they'd seen this theater before. On the way home, the city unwound. Brick, iron, water, light. She passed the street where the old Holloway warehouse had been refinished into tourist bait and remembered when it was inventory and sweat and ledgers and her. Back at the guest house. Hers to begin with. Hers still in ways few remembered. She set her handbag on the entry table, took off her jacket, and rolled her shoulders once. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and paper, the clean sense of order. She didn't pour a drink. She didn't call to vent. She took out her phone, opened a text thread that had never failed her, and typed with two steady thumbs. To Ruth. Activate Clause 7.1. We're going to court. The next morning, Charleston wore its usual disguise, the hum of cicadas, the slow roll of humidity, the genteel face of a city that preferred its scandals whispered behind lace curtains. Catherine Holloway didn't whisper anymore. Not after brunch. Ruth Maddox's law office sat above an old apothecary on Meeting Street, the kind of building where floorboards had opinions, and the air smelled faintly of leather and ink. Kat had been here 100 times in decades past, back when the Holloway business was still a real engine, not a trophy Amber liked to polish for Instagram. Ruth herself was waiting in the doorway, dark eyes sharp, silver hair pulled back like she'd been born in a courtroom. "You ready to stop playing quiet?" she asked without preamble. Kat stepped inside, unbuttoning her linen blazer. "I was quiet," she said, "not deaf." The conference table was bare except for a single manila folder, thick and neatly labeled. Kat opened her own leather case and slid out a heavier stack. The weight of it hit the table with a soft thud, the sound of proof. "This," Kat said, pulling the top page forward, "is the original ownership certification. 51% still mine. Signed by Martin Holloway, witnessed and filed. Never transferred." She tapped the number like it was a pulse. "She's been throwing my name on loan documents, branding partnerships, even that ridiculous charity gala she claimed was her idea. All of it under my legal roof." Ruth's mouth curved, not into a smile, but something closer to satisfaction. And Clause 7.1? Kat's fingers slid to the last page where the language sat like a loaded pistol. Financial misrepresentation under the Holloway Holdings name triggers immediate court reassessment by controlling owner. Ruth leaned in, reading it again even though she could probably quote it from memory. She's walked herself straight into this, shoes and all. Kat produced a pen from her bag, not a plastic clicktop, but a brass-barreled Mont Blanc that had signed every important document of her life. She signed the complaint in deliberate strokes, her hand steady, the black ink biting into the page. Ruth watched her. "We're not suing yet," she said, sliding the papers into the folder. "We're subpoenaing, paper first. Let her dig her own grave before we start shoveling." Kat met her eyes. "And Adam?" Ruth's voice was cool. "Your son has chosen absence as a position. You don't have to honor it." The window rattled faintly as a truck passed on the cobblestone outside. Kat smoothed the stack of papers, her rings catching the light. "She called me a leech in public," she said softly. "Let's see how she feeds without me." They went over logistics, dates, document requests, the order of motions. But Kat's mind was already walking the path ahead, from bank records to property lines. She knew Amber's kind of confidence, the kind built on thinking no one's watching the foundation. By the time Kat stepped out into the midday heat, the air felt different, lighter. Not because she'd won yet, but because she'd finally pulled the first trigger. Spanish moss swayed in the breeze, as if nodding approval. Back at the guest house, she set her bag down and made tea. The china cup warmed her hands, the steam curling up like a promise. She was halfway through her first sip when the sound of tires on gravel drew her eyes to the window. A courier in a navy polo approached the porch with a flat, thick envelope in hand. He knocked, nodded politely when she opened the door, and asked for a signature. The paper inside was heavier than it needed to be, the way legal documents often were. All weight and intent. She slid it open with the silver letter opener Martin had once used for contracts. The first line hit like a spark. Petition for removal from premises. Filed by Amber Holloway. Amber was trying to evict her. Kat set the papers down on the table, poured the rest of her tea, and smiled. A thin, dangerous curve. This wouldn't be a defense. This would be a demonstration. The envelope still smelled like printer toner when Kat laid it flat on the dining table. The words were bold, self-assured. Petition for removal from premises. The audacity almost made her laugh. Almost. She called Ruth. "She wants me out," Kat said, the sentence more observation than alarm. "Then we'll remind her who bought the door she's trying to close," Ruth replied. "Bring me the paper trail." Kat didn't have to search. The deed and closing statements lived in a slim blue folder in the bottom drawer of her desk, filed the same week she'd buried Martin. She slid out the pages and felt their weight. The crisp heft of money turned into walls. 80% of the purchase price had come from her accounts. The remainder from a mortgage she'd signed with a rate she'd negotiated in a bank office where the vice president still sent Christmas cards. Amber hadn't been in the picture then. She'd arrived later, with curated smiles and a hunger for optics. By noon, Kat was in Ruth's office again, the blue folder between them. Ruth flipped through, humming appreciatively, tapping nail on signature lines, highlighting the sentence that mattered. Grantor retains vested ownership interest. Residence is held under Holloway Holdings Trust. Kat's name sat on the deed like granite. "She really filed an informal eviction?" Kat asked, incredulous but composed. Ruth reached for another document. "Filed is generous. She submitted a notice to the property manager your son hired without reading your trust's occupancy clause." Ruth held up a light, vicious smile. "This will be fun." They worked at the long table, the room smelling of old wood and fresh coffee. Ruth dictated, her paralegal typed. "Draft a cease and desist addressed to Amber Holloway with exhibits A through E. Deed copy, closing statement, trust occupancy clause, payment ledger, and she glanced at Kat. That wire from your account the week after Martin's funeral, the one that covered the first roof repair. Amber called it storm damage, Kat said. She staged a photo with a hammer. Ruth didn't hide her snort. Exhibit F, the invoice with your signature, not hers. The letter took shape like a wall being built brick by brick. Cease and desist from any attempt to remove Ms. Catherine Holloway from the premises she co-owns. Any further false filings will be met with sanctions. Legal Latin slid in where it needed to, clean and unshowy. When Ruth finished, she read it back once, then signed with a flourish that made the paper feel heavier. File the injunction petition now, she told the paralegal. Emergency? Include a proposed order. Kat sat back, hands loose in her lap, breathing in the quiet control of the room. Let her keep lying, she said. We're building a wall of truth. Ruth nodded like a general, and we'll hang her statements on it, one by one. They didn't have to wait long. Within hours, the courthouse clerk stamped their petition with a time that would look excellent on future exhibits. 3:12 p.m. By 4:40, a judge they both knew for his impatience with theatrics signed the temporary restraining order. The language was blessedly plain. Catherine Holloway is enjoined from removal. Status quo to be maintained pending hearing. Ruth slid the copy across to Kat. That's your roof, she said softly. Legally, practically, permanently, until we say otherwise. Outside, Charleston's late afternoon heat pressed against the glass. The sky had that washed-out watercolor look the city wore before a storm. Kat gathered the papers with a care that wasn't fragile, just exacting. Deliver the cease and desist to her tonight, she said. Serve it during dinner. Ruth's mouth twitched. You really are done with quiet. Back at the guest house, the cicadas had started their evening chorus. Kat set the injunction order on the console table where the light caught the judge's signature. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and something sweeter. Jasmine sneaking in through the screened windows. She made tea, the kettle's high whistle the only dramatic moment she allowed herself. Her phone vibrated against the counter. Adam. Why are you doing this? Kat looked at the message for a long beat, the steam from her cup softening her glasses for a second. She thought of him at brunch, eyes lowered, the word Leech thrown like a drink in her face. She thought of the mortgage she'd negotiated, the checks she'd written, the repairs she'd covered while Amber was busy practicing charity smiles. She thought of the guest house she had built as a haven for old age and was now told she occupied by Grace. The screen brightened again, another message arriving. This one from an unknown number. A photo of a courier envelope on a marble island she recognized all too well. Amber's kitchen. The caption read, "Nice try." Kat enlarged the image. The envelope was unopened. The ignorance was almost tender. The knock on Kat's own door came moments later. A different courier, expression professional, handed over proof of service with a timestamp. Ruth moved fast when the wind was right. Kat took a sip of tea, let the warmth settle. Her thumbs hovered over Adam's message. She typed, deleted, typed again, finding the precise edge between truth and blood. The porch light clicked on automatically, bathing the entryway in a soft gold. Somewhere down the drive, a frog croaked like a tiny gavel. Kat's reflection looked back at her from the dark window, hair pinned, eyes cool, shoulders set. Nobody's tenant. Nobody's burden. She answered her son without flourish, without apology. You let her call me a leech. I'm just returning the blood. The next phase began, as most battles in Charleston do, with paperwork so dense it could sink a skiff. Ruth sat at her desk, a spread of printouts fanned across the polished surface, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. Tell me you've been sitting on these for a while, Ruth said, tapping the corner of a bank statement with a manicured nail. Kat, seated opposite, allowed the smallest curve of a smile. Every overdraft, every emergency transfer, every time she dipped into the business account to fund her little stage shows. The numbers told a story Amber would never post. Designer heels that cost more than a mortgage payment. First-class flights disguised as networking opportunities. Even a charge at a Paris boutique where the only networking done was between silk scarves and Amber's credit card. Your silent ownership, Ruth said, gives you the right to demand an audit. Full and retroactive. Kat took a slow sip of coffee, the bitter edge grounding her. Then we demand it. By noon, Ruth had drafted the motion. Precise, clinical, impossible to misinterpret. Audit to cover the last 36 months of all accounts under Holloway Holdings or any entity operating under its name. The request for records was exhaustive. Bank statements, invoices, wire transfer logs, merchant contracts, even the petty cash ledger Amber probably thought nobody touched. 2 hours later, Ruth's investigator called. We've got something offshore, he said. 2 transfers, both routed through a Shell LLC registered in Delaware. The name's different, but the mailing address? Her Pilates studio? Ruth's eyes gleamed. Get me the paperwork. Kat didn't flinch. That's theft. It's also leverage, Ruth replied. Let's tighten the noose. They didn't have to wait long for the perfect stage. Amber, oblivious to the tightening circle, announced a charity gala for the betterment of Charleston families, hosted in the ballroom of a riverside hotel. The invitations dripped in gold script and soft focus photos of Amber holding children she'd likely met only for the photographer's flash. Kat accepted her invitation immediately, not out of support, but for positioning. On the night of the gala, the city air was heavy with salt and magnolia. The hotel's chandelier light pooled over sequined gowns and tuxedos, champagne flutes catching the glow. Kat arrived in black silk, her hair swept into a twist, pearl earrings gleaming against her neck. She moved like a shadow in satin, every step measured. Amber was in her element. White gown, red lipstick, flanked by photographers as she leaned in to whisper fabricated benevolence. Her laugh was perfectly timed, her hand always resting lightly on an elbow or forearm for effect. Dinner was served, roasted duck with figs, paired with a Pinot Noir, whose price per glass could have covered a week's groceries. Kat said nothing, tasting each bite as if she were cataloging it for later. She let Amber talk about her foundation, her initiative, her vision, knowing full well the ledger would tell another story. Dessert arrived, a flourless chocolate cake plated with edible gold leaf. It was then that Ruth appeared, a black folder in hand. She moved between tables without hurry, her heels quiet on the carpet. Amber, mid-laugh, turned as Ruth approached. The room's hum didn't stop, but it seemed to dull, as if the air sensed a shift. Ruth set the folder on the tablecloth, sliding a single sheet forward. Mrs. Holloway, she said, her voice even. You've been served. Amber blinked, the word hanging in the space between them like an uninvited guest. It's an audit notice, Ruth continued. 36 months, all accounts, all entities, due in court within 30 days. The gold leaf on Amber's dessert glinted in the chandelier light, untouched. Kat dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin, placed it neatly on the plate, and said softly, only for Amber to hear, I do hope your receipts are as pretty as your invitations. The courtroom smelled like old wood and colder decisions. Light filtered through tall windows, turning dust into confetti that refused to celebrate. Catherine sat at counsel table, spine straight, hands folded, pearl studs steady as ticks on a metronome. Across the aisle, Amber adjusted her white blazer, performative purity, and tilted her phone screen just enough to catch her own reflection. All rise, the bailiff called. Chairs scraped, The judge entered. Gray hair, clear eyes, a patience that suggested a very short supply for theatrics. Amber's attorney jumped to his feet as soon as they were seated. Your Honor, before anything else, my client needs protection from Ms. Holloway's erratic behavior. She's unstable, harassing, and— Stop there, the judge said, voice even. We'll begin with the petition before the court, a request for emergency audit under Holloway Holdings Clause 7.1, and a competing attempt to remove Ms. Catherine Holloway from premises. Counsel for the petitioner? Ruth rose like a blade unfurling. Your Honor, the founding documents. She slid a slim binder onto the evidence cart, tabs flagged in precise primary colors. The clerk wheeled it forward. Ruth spoke without looking at Amber, as if addressing a concept rather than a person. Exhibit A, Articles of Incorporation. Exhibit B, Ownership Certification with 51% vested in Ms. Catherine Holloway. Exhibits C and D, Amendments co-signed by Catherine and her late husband, Martin Holloway. Exhibit E, Clause 7.1, which allows the controlling owner to trigger a court-ordered reassessment upon financial misrepresentation. The judge flipped. The paper made a soft, lethal whisper. Amber leaned toward her lawyer, whispering too loudly. She said she gave that up. The whisper traveled like gossip. The judge looked up. Counsel, do you have documentation of any transfer of ownership or relinquishment by Ms. Holloway? Amber's lawyer shuffled, flipped an empty folder, found air. We have verbal assurances, Your Honor. The judge's eyebrow twitched. This is a courtroom, not a supper club. Documentation? Silence ate the next second. Ruth didn't smile. She simply tapped the next tab. We also have preliminary findings, she continued. Personal expenditures drawn from business accounts, 2 offshore transfers routed through a shell LLC linked to Ms. Amber Holloway's address, and a so-called charity gala with no registered 501c3 status. Amber went stiff, then bright, the brightness of a star about to collapse. She's lying, she blurted. She doesn't even know what the business does. She has no role. She searched for the word and chose the only one that had served her lately. Unstable. Ruth didn't rise to the bait. Your Honor, we're not here to diagnose anyone. We're here to respect paper. The judge turned to Kat. Ms. Holloway, do you wish to address the claim that you have no role in the business? Kat rose, hands relaxed at her sides. Her voice was smoother than the polished bar in front of her. I built the ledger, Your Honor. I balanced it. I signed its birth certificate. I have no further comment. A few muffled chuckles from the gallery died quickly under the judge's look. He closed the binder, laid both hands on it like a benediction. This court finds Clause 7.1 valid and operative. The petitioner's exhibits are accepted. The attempted removal of Ms. Holloway from her residence is denied. Pending full adjudication, this court orders an immediate audit of all accounts and entities operating under Holloway Holdings for the past 36 months. Amber's attorney half rose again. Your Honor, this is punitive. This is procedural, the judge said. Sit down. Amber, refusing stillness, stood anyway. She's trying to ruin me because I wouldn't let her— She stopped, realizing she had no end to that sentence that didn't sound like vanity. The judge's gaze cooled another degree. Ms. Holloway, you will speak through counsel, and you will refrain from making unsubstantiated claims in my courtroom. One more outburst, and I will hold you in contempt. He paused, then turned back to Ruth. Anything further? Yes, Your Honor, Ruth said softly. Given the evidence of misrepresentation and the controlling owner's rights, we request temporary control of all Holloway Holdings accounts be granted to Ms. Catherine Holloway to preserve the status quo and prevent further misuse. Amber's laugh was quick and brittle. What status quo? She doesn't do anything. Ruth glanced at the judge. The status quo wherein money is not stolen. A beat. The courtroom settled into that particular silence only verdicts can make. The judge nodded once as if answering himself. Motion granted. Temporary control of all Holloway Holdings accounts is assigned to Ms. Catherine Holloway, effective immediately, pending trial. Audit to commence within 7 days. Counsel will confer on dates. He rapped the gavel once. The sound crisp as a snapped branch. We are set for trial. Amber's phone, face up on the table, lit at that exact moment with a flood of notifications. The worst possible soundtrack. She reached for it, then froze, remembering where she was. Kat watched her stop mid-reach, the habit of performance hitting the wall of consequence. As the judge stood, the room rose again. Papers shuffled. The clerk began distributing orders. Ruth placed a hand lightly on Kat's forearm. Not to steady her, but to anchor the moment as real. Amber's lawyer leaned in fast, hissed something urgent. Amber's mouth made a perfect useless O. Kat exhaled through her nose, the smallest nod to gravity. She had not raised her voice. She had not thrown a punch. She had just moved a number from one column to another in a room built for truth. Outside, on the courthouse steps, the heat hit like a wall, and a reporter's mic rose like a flag. Ms. Holloway, how does it feel to regain control? Kat didn't stop. She just answered without breaking stride. Mathematical. Behind her, Amber's phone finally rang, and rang, with cards declining in real time. The courthouse doors had barely swung shut behind them when the first unfollow landed. Amber's phone lit up like a slot, machine going cold. A ripple of vanished hearts, the gentle pop of disappearing blue checkmarks. Charleston could be loyal, but it had a nose for smoke. By sunset, the air in the city felt thick, storm-heavy with gossip. At a boutique on King Street, 2 of Amber's brunch friends stood under a chandelier of blown glass and whispered. She called her mother-in-law a leech and got sued into silence. The salesgirl nodded without nodding at all, the way retail does when it's also a confessional. Screenshots traveled faster than apologies. A group chat called Low Country Ladies rolled with little bubbles and big judgment. Heard the judge gave the accounts to the MIL. She owns the company, apparently. Y'all, delete the pics from her gala, it's a bad look. Amber tried to outrun it. She posted a story. Soft music, a pastel background, the words, "Taking time for mental health" written in a looping font. She spoke to the camera with damp lash sincerity about stepping back and focusing on what truly matters. Her face was perfect. Her voice trembled on cue. The view count was high. The share count was higher. The comments were less forgiving. So your mental health only mattered after the judge? Catherine posted once. No photo, no filters. Just a white background and a single sentence in clean serif. The truth is expensive. She never budgeted for it. She disabled comments and put her phone face down on a linen runner that smelled faintly of lemon oil and starch. Outside, a mockingbird tried out 3 songs in a row, changing genre mid-branch. Ruth handled the rest, legally, which in Charleston is its own genre of theater. She filed the judge's order with the clerk, then provided the public docket number to one particular reporter with the professional moral of a metronome. The next morning, the article went live. Court grants founder temporary control amid misuse claims. No adjectives, no blood, just the paperwork, glowing like a polished blade. In the Holloway house, the kitchen felt colder without invisible money moving through it. Adam sat at the island with a mug he didn't drink from, watching Amber curate her sorrow across 3 devices. He opened a text thread with his mother, typed, deleted, set the phone aside. Saying nothing had become a habit that felt like a job. "Babe?" Amber called without turning. "Should I post the photo with the shelter dogs or the one from the charity run?" He stared at the blank space on the marble where bills used to vanish. "Maybe don't post today." Her thumb hovered. You don't get it. Silence looks like guilt. He looked down. Sometimes it looks like dignity. They ate in the quiet, forks scraping porcelain. The air smelled like cold chicken and nerves. At the community center, Catherine poured coffee into foam cups and handed them to a row of retirees waiting for a seminar Ruth had agreed to give. The fluorescent lights hummed. The room smelled faintly of dust and determination. A woman with a careful bun reached for Kat's hand. "We saw you on the news," she whispered. "Good for you." Kat squeezed back. "Good for all of us," she said. Then she sat in the second row and let Ruth teach. The language of immunity and guardianship turning into verbs the women could wield. By afternoon, Amber's numbers had dipped into that particular valley from which rebrands rarely rise. Sponsors paused. A boutique muted their collaboration. A favorite restaurant regretted the social media confusion. The messages all used the word until. The messages all meant never. Ruth's paralegal texted Catherine a photo of a docket entry. Notice of production. Filed. Beneath it, a short message. Doors open. Catherine put on her sunglasses and drove past the river, the light off the water striking the windshield in coins. Amber recorded one more video, voice lower, eyes glossy. "We need to stop tearing women down," she said. "I'm focusing on wellness. I'll be donating to mental health causes." Her hand, just out of frame, clutched a crumpled tissue like a prop. Comments slid under it like knives wrapped in handkerchiefs. "Start with accountability. Start with receipts." When the knock came, it wasn't angry. It was polite. The kind of knock people use when they're certain the house they're standing at belongs to someone else. Amber opened the door. On the porch stood a woman in a navy suit, hair neat, expression unremarkable in a way that suggested professional devastation. She held a slim leather portfolio and a small body camera that blinked a red dot. "Mrs. Holloway?" the woman asked. Amber lifted her chin. "Yes." The woman took out an envelope and spoke for the benefit of the blink. "Subpoena Deuces Tecum. Full financial disclosure. All accounts, all entities, 3 years. You've been served." Amber took the envelope, fingers tight enough to crease the paper. Somewhere in the back of the house, a dishwasher hummed like nothing had changed. She closed the door and slid her thumbnail under the seal, and found not just the court's demand, but the list. Every account. Every transfer. Every name she'd used to launder the story. The first deadline stared back at her in black ink. 10 days. The first batch of documents arrived like a stack of limp excuses. Ruth spread them across her desk in a grid, each page pinned under a silver paperweight shaped like a gavel. "Messy," she murmured, scanning line after line. "Sloppy." Catherine sat opposite her, hands folded in her lap, watching as Ruth's pen tapped on a date that didn't belong. "See this?" Ruth slid the paper closer. "She says she paid a contractor here in March of last year. But this account," she flipped to another sheet, "didn't even exist until July." It went on like that. Missing invoices. Numbers that rounded too neatly. Entire months of charitable outreach with no receipts. One check, supposedly signed by Catherine, dated 3 years after her husband's funeral. Ruth held it up, the ink catching the light. "Tell me, Kat, did you rise from the grave to sign this?" Catherine didn't answer. She didn't need to. Ruth's assistant wheeled in a cart loaded with binders, each tab a different month. They started cross-referencing. August receipts matched October bank statements. Travel claims overlapped with fundraisers that never happened. And then there it was, the first real fracture. A signature in Catherine's name, the loops too high, the H too round. Ruth smiled without warmth. Forgery. Now we're not just talking mismanagement, we're talking criminal. Catherine poured herself another inch of tea from the china pot Ruth kept for her. Let her keep going, The more she talks, the less I'll have to. And talk Amber did. Outside the walls of the law office, she was waging a different kind of war, one fought in Instagram captions and filtered selfies. In a video shot in her sunlit kitchen, she sat with a mug and said to the camera, "Some people can't move on. They want to destroy your happiness just because they can't find their own." Vindictive. The word sat like a sour cherry in her mouth. Within 24 hours, Ruth had the clip in front of a judge. The ruling was swift. Cease all public commentary about the case or face contempt charges. The order landed in Amber's inbox like a slammed door. Back in court for depositions, Catherine took her seat, spine straight, eyes calm. Amber, across the table, was all fidget and gloss, shifting her papers, glancing at her lawyer. The air smelled faintly of overbrewed coffee and tension. The court reporter's keys clattered as the questions began. "Mrs. Holloway," Ruth said evenly, "on October 14th of last year, did you transfer $25,000 from the family business account to the Coastal Women's Foundation?" Amber straightened. "Yes, for charity." Ruth clicked her pen. "And can you produce documentation that the funds reached the foundation?" Amber's lips parted. It was a verbal agreement. A low, almost imperceptible hum came from Catherine's side of the table. Not a laugh. Something quieter, sharper. The deposition ran for hours. By the time they closed the record, Amber's stack of answers looked like a pile of wet leaves, fragile, clumped, barely holding together. The next morning, Ruth filed a motion for a perjury hearing. She attached the forged signature as Exhibit A, followed by the false invoices, the inconsistent dates, the charity with no record of the donation. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. The paper spoke for itself. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at Amber's house. Official, cream-colored, with a faint watermark of the Treasury seal. She slid it open in her kitchen, still in silk pajamas. Inside, in black type that didn't care about tone or reputation, were the words, "Internal Revenue Service, Notice of Inquiry." Subject, Coastal Women's Foundation. Purpose, verification of reported charitable expenditures. Amber's hand tightened on the paper until the edges curled. The sound of the dishwasher in the background suddenly seemed too loud, the clink of plates inside mocking in rhythm. She turned the page and saw the request for her full personal financial records, itemized from the past 5 years. The deadline, 14 days. The headline ran above the fold, black letters sharp against the cream paper. Charleston matriarch reclaims empire. The accompanying photo showed Catherine exiting the courthouse, chin high, pearl earrings catching the sun. The camera had caught her mid-step, deliberate, certain, with Ruth just behind her, carrying a leather case stuffed with documents. By the time Catherine returned to the guest house, 3 envelopes were tucked into her mailbox. No bills, just handwritten cards from old colleagues. One was from the former CFO of Holloway Maritime, penned in looping script. "You kept the company steady after Frank passed. We all knew it. Now they do too." She set the cards on the table beside her tea, each one a small restoration of the truth Amber had tried so hard to erase. The next message came not on paper, but as a quiet ping on Catherine's phone. "Harper, you don't deserve what she says." Catherine stared at the screen for a moment before replying, "It's okay. I'll let her keep talking." Under oath. The courthouse was doing more damage to Amber's image than Catherine ever could. Amber's once bustling social circle had thinned to whispers and half-hearted likes on her posts. The glossy photos of brunches, charity balls, and curated living room corners grew sparse. Her captions sounded defensive now, stretched thin between denial and justification. By the second week of hearings, even Adam had stopped showing up. Catherine noticed his absence without emotion, just another detail logged alongside the court dates and exhibit numbers. The bench beside Amber sat empty, save for her attorney and a stack of folders she clutched like a shield. The smell of fresh varnish hung in the courthouse lobby one morning when Ruth approached Catherine with a folder she hadn't shown anyone else. They sat in a quiet alcove, away from the echo of heels and the murmur of attorneys greeting each other. "I was reviewing her disclosure forms," Ruth said, flipping open the file. She turned over everything for the audit, at least, she claims she did. She slid a single page toward Catherine. The account statement was dated 18 months ago. The name at the top read Amber Whitaker, her maiden name, long since replaced on social media and in public life. The account balance was enough to buy a modest house. "She hid this?" Catherine asked, though the question was rhetorical. "Better," Ruth said. "She's been moving money in and out of it for years. Transfers from the family business accounts. Small amounts, regular intervals. It's clean enough to fool someone skimming, but not me." Catherine took a slow breath, the sound of traffic filtering in faintly through the courthouse windows. "That's the nail," she said. Ruth smiled without warmth. "It's the hammer." Ruth closed the folder with a crisp snap. "And I'm about to swing it." The courtroom was warmer than usual, but Catherine could still feel a chill settle in her bones. It wasn't nerves. It was anticipation. Ruth stood at the lectern, her voice steady and sharp, slicing through the low hum of side chatter. "Your Honor," she began, sliding a thick tabbed binder across the evidence table. "This is the forensic accounting report tracing $412,580 from the Holloway Maritime operating account to an entity called Whitaker Coastal Imports, LLC. A ripple moved through the gallery. Whitaker, Amber's maiden name. The judge, an older man with glasses perched low on his nose, peered over the document. "And the principal owner of this LLC?" Ruth's lips curved just slightly. "Amber Holloway, established 19 months ago. Funded entirely by transfers from the family business she claims my client no longer has control over." The air tightened. Catherine caught the faint smell of floor polish and someone's too strong perfume from the row behind her, but her focus stayed locked on Amber. Amber's jaw moved, grinding maybe, but her voice cracked when she spoke. This is a vendetta." Ruth didn't miss a beat. She stepped closer, her heels clicking like punctuation. "No, Mrs. Holloway, this is verification." She tapped the binder once for emphasis. "Every deposit, every withdrawal, every invoice paid from stolen funds, all verified." The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Until this matter is fully adjudicated, I am freezing all personal and business accounts in Mrs. Holloway's name." His gavel came down with a dull thud. Amber's hand flew to her mouth, and for the first time, her polished exterior cracked. Her cheeks flushed a deep, blotchy red. Ruth didn't turn to look at Catherine, but Catherine felt the unspoken victory between them. When it was Catherine's turn on the stand, she kept her tone even, almost detached. "I built a family," she said, her eyes fixed on the jury box. "She built a fraud. No dramatics, no raised voice, just fact." And somehow, that landed harder than anything Ruth had said all morning. Amber's legal team huddled like a team on the losing side of halftime. One of them finally rose. "Your Honor, in light of these developments, we'd like to propose settlement discussions." Ruth didn't even let them finish. Declined. Her answer was crisp, final. "We are proceeding to full trial." The judge made a note on his pad, then looked over his glasses at Amber. "Mrs. Holloway, you are hereby ordered to appear for a financial fraud trial beginning in 6 weeks. All sessions will be public record." A gasp broke from Amber. Involuntary. Sharp. Catherine noticed how quickly she tried to recover, smoothing her skirt, straightening her posture. But the damage was done. From the corner of her eye, Catherine saw a reporter scribbling in the press section. This wouldn't be a whisper in Charleston's private circles anymore. This would be headlines. As the gavel fell, Catherine thought, 6 weeks. That's all the time she has left to hide. And it won't be enough. The order came down in crisp legal language, but Catherine read it like poetry. Defendant to vacate premises within 14 days. All property to be removed under court supervision. Amber didn't show up to hear it read. Catherine doubted she had the stomach. 2 weeks later, the driveway filled with the rumble of a moving truck. Morning light slanted across the manicured lawn, making the brick of the main house glow a deep red. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and the lingering sweetness of last night's rain. Catherine stood at the edge of the porch, coffee in hand, as Ruth stepped out of her black sedan in a navy suit, clipboard in tow. "Ready?" Ruth asked, not smiling, but there was a gleam in her eyes. Catherine nodded. "I've been ready for years." Inside the guest house, movers in navy polo shirts and work gloves carried out boxes, furniture, and the occasional armful of designer shoes that looked entirely out of place in the quiet southern estate. Ruth checked off each item against the court inventory list, her pen clicking in sharp, satisfying bursts. Harper appeared in the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. She didn't look at her mother bustling around inside, barking half-hearted instructions about where things should go in the truck. Instead, she crossed the yard and wrapped her arms around Catherine. "I'm sorry," Harper whispered, her voice trembling, "for all of it." Catherine smoothed the girl's hair, feeling the faint scent of coconut shampoo. "None of this is yours to carry," she murmured back. "Go on. You've got your own life to live now." But Harper clung for a moment longer before pulling away, wiping at her eyes. Adam's car pulled into the drive mid-morning. He didn't get out. Instead, Catherine's phone buzzed in her pocket. "We need time," the text read. Her fingers moved over the screen without hesitation. "You had time. You gave it to silence." She hit send, slid the phone back, and didn't look up at the car again. By early afternoon, the guest house stood hollow, the last echoes of footsteps fading into the quiet hum of cicadas outside. The movers closed the truck doors with a final metallic thud, and Amber emerged for her last crossing of the gravel path. Her heels clicked with defiance, her oversized sunglasses hiding eyes Catherine didn't care to see. She didn't speak, didn't look back. But the set of her shoulders screamed fury. Ruth signed the final page of the court inventory and handed the keys, Catherine's keys, back to her. The metal felt cool and solid in her palm, heavier than they had in years. By the time the truck disappeared down the road, the estate felt lighter. The main house windows reflected nothing but sky, and the guest house, her guest house, was silent again, the way it should be. That night, as Catherine settled in with her tea, her phone lit up again. A social media post, Amber's profile picture framed in tragic black and white. "This woman destroyed me." The comments were already climbing by the second. The gavel struck once, the sound echoing like a rifle crack through the hushed courtroom. Catherine didn't blink. Judge Whitcomb leaned forward, glasses low on his nose, and read from the ruling. "This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Catherine Holloway, on all counts." Amber's knuckles whitened around the edge of the defense table. The list of penalties came next, each one precise and irreversible. "The defendant, Amber Holloway, is hereby ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $482,000, fined for breach of fiduciary duty, and permanently barred from holding any fiduciary or executive position for a period no less than 20 years. It was the kind of judgment that stripped not only assets but identity. The murmurs from the gallery swelled, a mix of shock and a faint, almost guilty satisfaction. Ruth allowed herself the smallest smile as the judge continued. "Furthermore, the Holloway Family Trust." He looked directly at Catherine. Will remain under your control, Mrs. Holloway, with immediate effect. The college fund for Harper Holloway is to be managed solely by you, with quarterly oversight filed with this court. Catherine inclined her head. Understood, Your Honor. The ruling concluded with an unusual formality. And lastly, Judge Whitcomb said, this court extends its thanks to attorney Ruth Maddox for the clarity and thoroughness of her filings. The work speaks for itself. Ruth's pen stilled in her hand, and she gave the faintest nod of acknowledgement. Amber, meanwhile, had gone red beneath the expertly layered makeup. When the bailiff approached, she flinched as though his hand were a threat, not a guide. Her designer bag hung limply at her side as she was escorted toward the double doors, her trembling visible even under the glare of the overhead lights. She passed within arm's reach of Catherine but didn't meet her gaze. That was fine. Catherine had no interest in eye contact with someone who had spent years looking down on her. Once Amber was gone, Ruth began collecting documents, sliding them neatly into her leather case. You've just changed the entire conversation about yourself, she murmured. I didn't ruin her, Catherine replied, standing with slow precision. I revealed her. They exited together into the corridor, the smell of polished wood and old paper mingling with the faint metallic tang of the courthouse air. Harper was waiting just outside, her shoulders sagging in visible relief. She didn't speak, just stepped forward and hugged Catherine tightly. Catherine held her granddaughter close. For all the noise and spectacle of the trial, this was the only outcome she truly cared about. Outside, the Charleston air was heavy with late afternoon heat. The courthouse steps felt lighter beneath her feet than they had months ago. As they reached Ruth's car, Catherine's phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number. She swiped to answer. Mrs. Holloway? A crisp voice asked. This is Daniel Cross with the National Business Ledger. We've been following your case. We'd like to feature you in our next issue. Profile piece. Cover consideration. Working title. The Matriarch Who Took Back the Reins. Catherine let the words settle, her gaze lifting toward the courthouse doors still swinging shut behind her. She smiled faintly into the receiver. You may want to make that title shorter, she said. The next chapter's still being written. The studio lights were hotter than Catherine expected, though she refused to let the heat touch her expression. She sat straight-backed in the leather chair, hands folded in her lap, as the Forbes interviewer leaned forward. You've been called a lot of things this past year, the journalist began, voice even but curious. What do you think the most accurate one is? Catherine smiled, not unkindly. Survivor. But not the kind who crawls out of wreckage, the kind who builds something stronger from the rubble. The headline they'd pitched was never too old to reclaim power, and it fit. She spoke of the quiet months before the court case, of watching Amber weave lies like expensive drapes, thin enough to see through, but decorative enough to fool guests. She described the moment she realized her silence was being mistaken for weakness. I didn't win because I was angry, she told the camera. I won because I kept my receipts. The interview aired within a week. Emails poured in from women in Boston, San Diego, even one from rural Alaska. Retirees who'd been pushed out of their businesses. Widows who'd been manipulated out of homes they'd paid for. They all said the same thing. You made me believe I can fight too. Ruth saw the wave of response coming and seized it. Within a month, she was hosting estate planning seminars for women over 60, free of charge. Catherine attended the first one, not to speak, but to watch the rows of gray-haired women take notes with the same intensity Amber once reserved for Instagram captions. Harper moved into Catherine's guest room soon after. She arrived with 2 suitcases, a shy smile, and a therapist's card already in her hand. The first night she apologized, not for Amber, but for not knowing the truth sooner. Catherine just patted her cheek. You can't apologize for someone else's lies, sweetheart, only for believing them. Adam didn't call, not once. His silence was like a shadow, always there, always stretching between them, but no longer something Catherine feared. She had already buried one man she loved. She wouldn't grieve for one who was still breathing but had chosen absence. Meanwhile, Amber's fall was swift. With her accounts frozen, her credit shot, and her name scorched in Charleston society, she filed for bankruptcy. The papers didn't even shock Catherine, just confirmed what she already knew. Amber had built her kingdom on borrowed bricks. The morning Forbes hit newsstands, Catherine sat on her porch with a mug of chicory coffee. The live oak swayed in the wind, and the faint scent of salt water drifted up from the harbor. She turned the glossy cover over in her hands, amused by the bold text under her photo. The matriarch who wrote the last word. A courier van pulled into her driveway mid-morning. The driver stepped out, holding a large cream envelope sealed with thick black wax. "Mrs. Holloway?" he asked. "Yes." "Signature here." She signed, her curiosity tinged with wariness. Inside, on crisp letterhead, was a short note written in a hand she recognized from decades ago. "Catherine, I've been watching. The way you handled that trial, your late husband would have been proud. I have an idea, and I think you're the only one who can help me make it real. Let's rebuild." It was signed, James Whitmore, her husband's former business partner. She let the letter rest in her lap, eyes narrowing slightly as the wind shifted, carrying the scent of something electric, like the air before a storm. Catherine smiled, a slow, deliberate curve. "Well, James," she murmured to herself, "it seems the next game's about to start." Catherine had always known that revenge was too small a word for what she wanted. Revenge ended with one person humiliated. Legacy, though, that was a living, breathing thing. It could outlast her, outlast all of them. The day she and Ruth signed the papers for Found Her, the air in the notary's office seemed brighter, charged. The nonprofit's mission was simple, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Support for women over 60 reclaiming legal and financial control of what's theirs. Ruth, adjusting her glasses, murmured as she slid the pen back into her leather folio. "This is the part Amber won't understand. You're not just taking from her. You're giving to every woman she wishes would stay quiet." Within a week, donations began pouring in, old friends from the business community, strangers who had only read the Forbes article, widows who had been pushed out of their family homes, even a few quietly resentful men, leaving anonymous checks with no return address. Every dollar built something stronger. A helpline staffed by estate lawyers, workshops on trust clauses, a grant for women battling legal eviction from properties they owned. Catherine insisted on one rule: every client left with documents in hand and the confidence to use them. Amber's name began circulating again, but not in the way she'd hope. At luncheons, people whispered, "Don't pull an Amber." It became shorthand for reckless spending and legal overreach. Catherine didn't spread it herself. She didn't need to. Reputation, once cracked, crumbled all on its own. One afternoon, Ruth walked into Catherine's office holding her phone, grinning. "You'll like this. A legal podcast just ranked your case as 2025's most satisfying verdict." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "They make lists for that?" "They do now," Ruth replied. Catherine listened to the episode later that night. The hosts described her as the Charleston matriarch who dismantled an entire scheme without ever raising her voice. They replayed her courtroom line, "I didn't ruin her. I revealed her," like it was the closing argument in a movie. But the real work was quieter. Late nights at her desk, reviewing grant applications, meetings with women whose voices trembled at first, but steadied when they learned the law was still on their side. Harper started volunteering on weekends, organizing files, bringing coffee, and listening to the stories. It was during one of those evenings, while Harper was stapling paperwork, that Catherine opened her own will. The page naming Adam as a co-beneficiary had been untouched for years. She read it once more, then slowly, deliberately, crossed his name out. Only Harper remained, the girl who had walked away from her mother's lies and chosen truth instead. The instructions were clear: performance-based release, education priority, and a clause about dignity that mirrored the one Catherine had once lived by. When Ruth notarized the updated will, she hesitated only once. No mention of Adam at all? Catherine's voice didn't waver. None. He had a seat at my table. He gave it away. The ink was barely dry when the mail arrived that evening. Harper, sorting through envelopes, paused at one. "It's handwritten," she said, curiosity flickering. "No return address." Catherine took it. The paper was thick, expensive. The cursive on the front was unmistakable: Amber's. The loops in the C of her name were as dramatic as ever, like they had been drawn for an audience. Harper tilted her head. "Are you going to open it?" Catherine turned the envelope over in her hands, feeling the weight of it. She didn't need to read the words inside to know they would be a performance. Pleading, maybe threatening, wrapped in the same false sweetness Amber had always worn like perfume. She set it on the desk, unopened. Catherine smiled faintly. Some letters don't need answering, they just need filing, under history. The morning the final wire transfer cleared, Catherine closed her laptop and pushed it away, as if it were a relic she'd never touch again. That account, the one they had bled dry for years, was empty now, not because she had nothing left, but because they had nothing left to take. Her new will, signed and notarized, sat in a thick folder on the desk. The no access clause was Ruth's idea, but Catherine had sharpened the language herself. It wasn't just about preventing them from touching her money. It barred any relative who had committed fraud, defamation, or willful neglect from benefiting from her estate in perpetuity. No appeal, no loophole. Ruth read the clause aloud one more time, smiling faintly. "This is ironclad. They could throw a team of lawyers at it and it wouldn't make a dent." "That's the idea," Catherine said, capping her pen. "If they ever want to see me again, it won't be at a bank." Life felt different without the constant shadow of their entitlement. Harper noticed it first, how the air in the house seemed lighter, how Catherine's laughter came easier. The girl was thriving, finally free from the manipulation that had always hung over her. She started getting straight A's, spent more time outside, and even signed up for a summer architecture program. One afternoon, Harper came home waving an acceptance packet. "I got in. They gave me a scholarship, but I don't have to worry about the rest, right?" Catherine pulled her into a hug. "Not for a second. We invest in futures here, not facades." Ruth stopped by that week with a bottle of wine and a knowing smile. "You did it." Catherine shook her head. "Number I stopped doing it for them. That's a bigger victory." The days were peaceful now, but the absence of their chaos didn't mean they'd given up. Catherine knew Amber well enough to understand she'd circle back eventually. Predators rarely recognized when the hunt was over. They just kept looking for a weaker door to push open. The first attempt came through the phone. Amber's name lit up the screen, the letters bold and sharp like they were daring Catherine to press accept. The call rang, out twice before Catherine picked up the device and, without a word, held the power button until the screen went black. Silence. It felt better than any argument ever could. That evening, Catherine sat on the porch with a mug of chamomile tea, watching the fireflies blink across the yard. On the table beside her was a small yellowed envelope she hadn't opened in years, the first subpoena she'd ever signed. Back then, her hands had shaken as she scrawled her name across the line, unsure if she had the strength to see it through. She did. She picked it up now, the edges rough under her fingertips. The paper smelled faintly of ink and time. In the distance, she could hear Harper's music playing from her bedroom and Ruth's voice in the kitchen, laughing with one of the volunteers from Found Her. No more courtrooms. No more giving them the dignity of a fight. This, she thought, is the real closing argument. Catherine struck a match. The flame flared, licking at the paper until the ink curled and blackened. She held it over the ceramic bowl until it collapsed into ash, a puff of gray rising into the night air before drifting away. She blew out the match and whispered to herself, "Some bridges aren't burned. They're incinerated." The morning light poured over the estate in soft gold, sliding across the manicured lawn and catching in the dew that clung to the roses she'd replanted last spring. Catherine walked the property slowly, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. Every step on the gravel path crunched beneath her shoes, a deliberate reminder that this land was hers again, free of squatters, parasites, and pretense. The air carried the faint sweetness of magnolia and the salt-kissed breeze from the harbor. She paused at the new brick wall near the entrance, running her fingertips over the engraved letters, "Found," her foundation. Below, in smaller font, in honor of Catherine Holloway, owner, founder, plaintiff. It still amused her that the three words Amber had once tried to erase, owner, founder, plaintiff, now lived on in stone. No court ruling could ever be this permanent. Inside the main hall, volunteers were already setting up for the weekend seminar, Estate Control for Women Over 60. She could hear the echo of their laughter in the tall ceilings, smell the brewing coffee, and feel the calm hum of something she'd built without a single dollar of theirs. That afternoon, Harper crossed the stage in her navy cap and gown, the tassel swinging against her cheek. Catherine sat in the front row, hands clasped, heart swelling. When Harper's name was called, valedictorian, Catherine caught her eye. No words, just a proud nod. They both knew this moment wasn't just about grades. It was about surviving something heavier than any textbook. Later, at the small graduation dinner Ruth had arranged, the older woman slid a velvet box across the table. Inside was a silver plaque engraved with a single line, "The matriarch, the last word." Catherine chuckled softly, tracing the letters. "I'll take that over any court title." "You earned it," Ruth said, raising her glass. "And you never had to raise your voice to get it." Halfway through dessert, a man she didn't recognize approached their table. He was in his 40s, with a polite but curious smile. "Excuse me," he said. "You're Catherine Holloway, right? The one who crushed that fraud case last year?" Catherine set down her fork and regarded him evenly. "I am." He shook his head, almost laughing. "That was inspiring. My mother followed your case start to finish. She said you made her feel like she could finally take back what was hers." Catherine smiled, not the triumphant kind, but the quiet, settled kind that comes from knowing the war is over and the victory was absolute. "Tell her she's already halfway there if she believes it." As the sun dipped low, she stepped outside, the evening air warm against her skin. The estate glowed in the fading light, untouched, unbothered, unclaimed by anyone but her. She thought of Amber and the chaos she'd brought, of Adam and the silence he'd chosen, and of the years she'd spent feeding a machine that never said thank you. Amber had been wrong about many things, but most of all, she'd misunderstood what it meant to call someone a leech. Leeches don't cling out of weakness. They take what they need, detach, and leave you to deal with the wound. Catherine had taken back her dignity, her property, her business, and her peace. She had no reason to stay tethered to them anymore. She turned toward the darkening horizon, a soft breeze tugging at her hair. The estate was hers. The name on the foundation wall was hers. The freedom to never answer their calls again was hers. She drained herself dry trying to bury me. I let the court do the cleanup.